The incident. Keanu Reeves stepped onto the jet bridge, clutching a well-worn carry-on bag and his boarding pass. Dressed in a black t-shirt, faded jeans, and scuffed sneakers, with a baseball cap pulled low over his face, he looked more like an everyday traveler than a global movie star. That was precisely the point. Keanu had long mastered the art of blending in, preferring a quiet, unassuming presence to the spotlight that followed him everywhere. Today, he was flying first class on a transcontinental flight, eager to enjoy a few hours of peace before a busy schedule. As he entered the cabin, the plush leather seats and polished ambience of first class greeted him. The flight attendants were already bustling, checking last-minute preparations before takeoff. The first encounter. Vanessa, a flight attendant in her late 30s, with a sharp uniform and an air of authority, noticed Keanu as he entered. Her eyes flicked over his casual attire, and she frowned slightly. To her, he looked more like someone who had stumbled into first class by mistake than a passenger who belonged there. "Excuse me, sir," Vanessa said as she stepped forward, her voice polite but firm. "I think you might be in the wrong section. First class is reserved for premium ticket holders." Keanu paused, lifting his cap slightly to reveal his face. "This is my seat," he replied gently, holding out his boarding pass. Vanessa took the ticket with a skeptical expression, glancing at it quickly. Her frown deepened as she studied the details, clearly expecting to find an error. But the boarding pass was valid, clearly marked for first class. Vanessa murmured, handing the pass back to him with a tight smile. "Please take your seat, then." Keanu nodded, his composure unshaken. "Thank you," he said simply, moving toward his assigned seat. He stowed his bag in the overhead compartment and settled into his chair, looking out the window as the other passengers filed in. Public confrontation. Despite the clear evidence of his ticket, Vanessa couldn't shake her assumptions. As she continued her pre-flight duties, she found herself glancing at Keanu repeatedly, her mind working to reconcile his low-key appearance with the luxury of first class. Eventually, her curiosity got the better of her. Returning to Keanu's seat, Vanessa cleared her throat. "Sir," she began, her tone more pointed this time, "are you sure this is the correct seat? Sometimes mistakes happen during booking, and economy is just a few rows back." Keanu turned to her, his expression calm but slightly puzzled. "This is my seat," he repeated. "I'm sure." Vanessa glanced around, aware of the growing attention from nearby passengers. A few exchanged confused glances, while others began whispering among themselves. One man, seated a few rows back, raised an eyebrow, clearly recognizing Keanu but choosing not to intervene just yet. "Well," Vanessa said, her voice carrying a hint of exasperation, "if you're certain, then I suppose we'll leave it at that. But I'll be keeping an eye on things." Keanu gave her a small, understanding nod. "That's fine," he said. "You're just doing your job. Passengers take note." As Vanessa walked away, the tension lingered in the air. Passengers nearby murmured quietly, their curiosity piqued. Some recognized Keanu immediately, their surprise at his treatment evident in their expressions. Others were simply perplexed by the exchange, unsure why the flight attendant had singled him out. A woman seated across the aisle leaned toward her husband. "Isn't that Keanu Reeves?" she whispered. "I think it is," the man replied, his tone tinged with disbelief. "What's she doing questioning him like that?" Meanwhile, Keanu remained unfazed, his focus shifting back to the window. If the interaction had bothered him, he didn't show it. Instead, he adjusted his seatbelt and prepared for takeoff, his quiet demeanor putting those around him at ease. But Vanessa's lingering glances and dismissive tone had already left an impression on the cabin, and the flight was far from over. Keanu's composure. As the plane taxied onto the runway, Keanu Reeves sat quietly in his seat, his focus on the clouds outside. Despite the earlier interaction with Vanessa, his demeanor remained calm and unbothered. He was used to being underestimated when dressed casually, and he preferred not to make a scene. Still, he could feel the glances from other passengers, some of whom had recognized him, while others were simply curious about the flight attendant's earlier behavior. Another check. About 30 minutes into the flight, Vanessa returned to Keanu's row, her clipboard in hand. She hesitated for a moment, as though debating whether to approach him, then cleared her throat to announce her presence. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her tone clipped but attempting politeness. "I need to double-check your ticket again for the manifest." "Just a routine procedure." Keanu looked up, his expression composed but tinged with subtle curiosity. "Of course," he said, retrieving his boarding pass from his pocket and handing it to her. Vanessa studied it as if expecting to find an error. The ticket was valid, clearly marked with his name and the seat number in first class. She hesitated for a beat before handing it back, her cheeks reddening slightly. "Thank you," she said curtly, avoiding eye contact. "Just following protocol." Keanu smiled faintly. "No problem. I hope everything checks out." Vanessa nodded briskly and walked away, but her rigid posture betrayed her lingering embarrassment. Several passengers had watched the interaction, and whispers began to spread through the cabin. Dismissive treatment. Throughout the flight, Vanessa continued her rounds, but her demeanor toward Keanu remained cold. When it came time to serve meals, she placed his tray on his table with a little less care than the other passengers, the plate clinking louder than necessary. When offering drinks, her tone with him lacked the warmth she showed to others. "Would you like a drink, sir?" she asked flatly, as though reading from a script. Keanu glanced up at her, his expression neutral. "Water, please," he said simply. Vanessa returned a moment later, setting the glass on his tray, without a word. Keanu thanked her politely, but she turned and walked away before he finished speaking. Despite her dismissive attitude, Keanu remained unfazed. He ate his meal quietly, sipped his water, and even offered a few kind smiles to the flight attendants who passed by, undeterred by Vanessa's behavior. Passengers began to notice. As the flight continued, the passengers around Keanu couldn't help but notice the tension. Many had recognized him by now and were puzzled by Vanessa's behavior. "She's treating him like he doesn't belong here," one woman whispered to her companion. "Doesn't she know who he is?" another passenger murmured. "That's Keanu Reeves. He could buy the whole airline if he wanted to." Keanu, however, seemed impervious to the whispers and side glances. He leaned back in his seat, occasionally jotting notes in a small notebook he carried with him. To him, the situation wasn't worth escalating. Vanessa's behavior reflected more on her than on him, and he had no intention of letting it ruin his journey. Setting an example. When Vanessa passed by again, this time avoiding eye contact entirely, Keanu caught her attention with a soft but deliberate "excuse me." Vanessa stopped, her expression cautious. "Yes? Could I have a refill of water, please?" Keanu asked, his tone as kind and respectful as ever. Vanessa nodded stiffly, retrieving his glass and filling it before placing it back on his tray with the same abruptness as before. "Here you go," she said shortly. "Thank you," Keanu replied, his voice steady and sincere. The interaction, though brief, left an impression on the passengers around him. Despite the dismissive treatment he'd endured, Keanu remained calm, polite, and composed, refusing to let the situation escalate. His quiet grace in the face of Vanessa's attitude began to shift the energy in the cabin, turning curiosity into quiet admiration. A silent example. By the time the flight neared its destination, the whispers had grown into a subtle but collective acknowledgement among the passengers. Keanu Reeves wasn't just a movie star, he was a person who handled adversity with dignity and poise. Vanessa's behavior, on the other hand, had not gone unnoticed, and her dismissive attitude left many wondering if the airline would address her unprofessionalism. Keanu, meanwhile, remained focused on the journey ahead, unaware that his quiet composure was inspiring those around him to rethink how they treated others. A witness speaks up. Halfway through the flight, the first-class cabin had settled into a quiet hum. Passengers relaxed in their spacious seats, some watching in-flight entertainment while others worked on laptops or chatted softly. Keanu Reeves, as calm as ever, had his headphones on, his focus on a book he had pulled from his carry-on. Despite Vanessa's earlier behavior, he showed no signs of irritation, maintaining his characteristic grace. But the atmosphere shifted when a fellow passenger, a middle-aged man in a tailored suit, began whispering to his wife. "That's Keanu Reeves," the man said quietly, nodding toward Keanu's seat. "Are you sure?" his wife asked, leaning closer to glance discreetly in Keanu's direction. "Positive," the man replied. "I met him at a charity gala years ago. He's one of the nicest people you'll ever meet." The couple's murmurs caught the attention of another passenger seated nearby, and soon, a small ripple of recognition spread through the cabin. The whispers weren't loud, but they carried a mix of surprise and quiet indignation at how Vanessa had treated him. Approaching Vanessa. The suited man, whose name was Michael, had watched Vanessa's earlier interactions with Keanu, and he couldn't shake the unease it left him with. He had seen Vanessa's dismissive tone and curt behavior, and knowing Keanu's reputation, it felt profoundly unfair. Michael decided to act. He waited until Vanessa passed his row, then leaned forward slightly to catch her attention. "Excuse me, miss," he said politely. "Yes?" Vanessa replied, her tone brisk. "I thought you should know," Michael said in a low voice, "the man you've been treating so coldly is Keanu Reeves." Vanessa froze, her eyes widening slightly. "Keanu Reeves," she repeated, as if testing the words. "Yes," Michael said, nodding. "The actor. The man whose movies have grossed billions worldwide. The one who quietly donates to charity and treats everyone with respect. That Keanu Reeves." Vanessa's face paled as the realization sank in. She glanced toward Keanu's seat, where he sat quietly, oblivious to the conversation. I didn't realize," she stammered. "Well," Michael said, his tone pointed but not unkind, "maybe you should treat all your passengers with respect, regardless of who they are." Vanessa swallowed hard, her mind racing. She hadn't recognized Keanu, his casual attire and low-key demeanor had thrown her off, but the knowledge of who he was made her earlier behavior feel suddenly magnified. A wave of panic swept over her as she imagined the potential fallout. A witness speaks up. Halfway through the flight, the first-class cabin had settled into a quiet hum. Passengers relaxed in their spacious seats, some watching in-flight entertainment while others worked on laptops or chatted softly. Keanu Reeves, as calm as ever, had his headphones on, his focus on a book he had pulled from his carry-on. Despite Vanessa's earlier behavior, he showed no signs of irritation, maintaining his characteristic grace. But the atmosphere shifted when a fellow passenger, a middle-aged man in a tailored suit, began whispering to his wife. "That's Keanu Reeves," the man said quietly, nodding toward Keanu's seat. "Are you sure?" his wife asked, leaning closer to glance discreetly in Keanu's direction. "Positive," the man replied. "I met him at a charity gala years ago. He's one of the nicest people you'll ever meet." The couple's murmurs caught the attention of another passenger seated nearby, and soon, a small ripple of recognition spread through the cabin. The whispers weren't loud, but they carried a mix of surprise and quiet indignation at how Vanessa had treated him. Approaching Vanessa. The suited man, whose name was Michael, had watched Vanessa's earlier interactions with Keanu, and he couldn't shake the unease it left him with. He had seen Vanessa's dismissive tone and curt behavior, and knowing Keanu's reputation, it felt profoundly unfair. Michael decided to act. He waited until Vanessa passed his row, then leaned forward slightly to catch her attention. "Excuse me, miss," he said politely. "Yes?" Vanessa replied, her tone brisk. "I thought you should know," Michael said in a low voice, "the man you've been treating so coldly is Keanu Reeves." Vanessa froze, her eyes widening slightly. "Keanu Reeves," she repeated, as if testing the words. "Yes," Michael said, nodding. "The actor. The man whose movies have grossed billions worldwide. The one who quietly donates to charity and treats everyone with respect. That Keanu Reeves." Vanessa's face paled as the realization sank in. She glanced toward Keanu's seat, where he sat quietly, oblivious to the conversation. I didn't realize," she stammered. "Well," Michael said, his tone pointed but not unkind, "maybe you should treat all your passengers with respect, regardless of who they are." Vanessa swallowed hard, her mind racing. She hadn't recognized Keanu, his casual attire and low-key demeanor had thrown her off, but the knowledge of who he was made her earlier behavior feel suddenly magnified. A wave of panic swept over her as she imagined the potential fallout. The ripple effect. Word of Keanu's identity began to spread quietly through the cabin. Passengers exchanged knowing glances and soft whispers, and the mood shifted from mild curiosity to admiration for how he had handled the situation. "He's been nothing but polite," one woman said to her seatmate. "Even after the way she treated him." "Typical Keanu," another passenger murmured. "Humble to a fault." As the whispers grew, Vanessa's discomfort became increasingly evident. She avoided looking in Keanu's direction, her normally brisk movements becoming awkward and hesitant. The weight of her mistake settled heavily on her shoulders, and she realized she had not only misjudged him but had likely embarrassed herself in front of the entire first-class cabin. Passengers praise Keanu. Several passengers, emboldened by the revelation, began to speak openly about Keanu. "I saw the way he handled it," Michael said to a small group near him. "Not a single complaint. Just calm, polite responses. That's class." "He could have called her out," another passenger added. "But he didn't. That says a lot about his character." Keanu, still unaware of the growing buzz around him, continued reading his book. Occasionally, he glanced up to take a sip of water or adjust his seat, his demeanor as composed as ever. To him, the incident wasn't worth dwelling on. He had experienced far worse in his life and chose not to let small slights define his day. Vanessa's growing unease. Vanessa, however, couldn't ignore the shift in the cabin's energy. Her earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by a nervous energy that made her fumble simple tasks. She replayed her interactions with Keanu in her mind, cringing at her dismissive tone and curt responses. Finally, Vanessa made a decision. She would have to address the situation directly, no matter how difficult it was. But as she steeled herself to approach Keanu, the thought of facing him, after everything she had done, left her frozen in place. The stage was set for a confrontation, and everyone in the cabin could feel it coming. But what they didn't expect was the grace and humility Keanu would once again demonstrate, leaving an indelible mark on everyone who witnessed it. The confrontation. The plane touched down smoothly, its wheels rolling along the runway as the passengers prepared to disembark. Keanu Reeves gathered his belongings calmly, sliding his book into his carry-on and adjusting his cap. While the atmosphere in the first-class cabin had been heavy with whispered conversations about him, he remained focused, unaware of the buzz that followed his every move. As the passengers began to exit the plane, Keanu was approached by a member of the airline's ground crew. The man, dressed in a sharp uniform and wearing a badge identifying him as the airline's operations manager, offered a polite but serious smile. "Mr. Reeves," he began, extending his hand. "My name is Mark, and I'm the operations manager for this flight. May I have a word with you?" Keanu shook his hand, his expression neutral but polite. "Of course," he said. Mark led him toward a quiet corner of the terminal, where Vanessa was waiting, her face pale and her hands clasped nervously in front of her. It was clear she knew what was coming. The manager's apology. "First, let me say how sorry I am for the experience you had on board," Mark began, his tone earnest. "We pride ourselves on providing excellent service to all our passengers, and what happened today fell far short of that standard." Keanu nodded slightly, his gaze steady. "I appreciate you addressing it," he said simply. Mark continued, "I've spoken with Vanessa about the incident, and she'd like to apologize to you directly." Keanu turned to Vanessa, his expression calm but firm. "I'm happy to hear what she has to say." Vanessa's apology. Vanessa took a deep breath, her voice trembling slightly as she began. "Mr. Reeves, I want to sincerely apologize for the way I treated you on the flight. I made assumptions based on appearances, and I was wrong. You were nothing but kind and respectful, and I didn't show you the same courtesy." She paused, her eyes darting nervously toward the floor. "I'm deeply embarrassed by my behavior, and I want you to know it won't happen again. I've learned an important lesson, and I'll do better moving forward." Keanu regarded her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Then, he spoke, his tone measured and calm. "Vanessa, thank you for your apology. It's not easy to admit when you've made a mistake, and I respect you for doing so." Vanessa's shoulders relaxed slightly, but Keanu wasn't finished. "A lesson in respect. But," he continued, his voice soft but firm, "I want to make something clear, not just for me, but for everyone you serve. Respect isn't about who someone is, or what they look like. It's about recognizing the humanity in every person you meet." Vanessa nodded, her face flushed with shame. "I don't expect special treatment," Keanu said. "I never have. But every passenger on your flights deserves to feel welcome, whether they're wearing a suit, jeans, or a uniform." Vanessa swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Reeves. I should have treated you, and every passenger, with the same respect." "I'm so sorry." Keanu gave her a small, understanding nod. "We all make mistakes. What matters is that we learn from them. Treat every guest as if they're important, because they are." The aftermath. Mark stepped forward, his voice full of sincerity. "Mr. Reeves, we're grateful for your patience and understanding. I'll make sure Vanessa undergoes additional training, and we'll be reviewing our service standards across the board." Keanu extended a hand toward Vanessa, who hesitated for a moment before shaking it. "Thank you," he said. "I hope this becomes an opportunity for growth." Vanessa's eyes glistened with gratitude. "It will. Thank you for your kindness." As Keanu turned to leave, the whispers from passengers in the terminal began again, this time filled with admiration for the way he had handled the situation. To them, it wasn't just about a famous actor's mistreatment, it was about the quiet dignity and grace he displayed in teaching a lesson that resonated far beyond the confines of the flight. A subtle reminder. As Keanu exited the airport, he reflected on the events of the day. For him, it wasn't about making a scene or demanding retribution. It was about setting an example, one interaction at a time, to show that respect and kindness were universal values that transcended status, wealth, or appearances. For Vanessa, the experience became a turning point in her career. She carried Keanu's words with her, using them as a guide to treat every passenger with dignity. And for those who had witnessed the confrontation, it was a story they would carry with them, a reminder that even the smallest actions could ripple outward, creating a more compassionate world. An unforgettable lesson. The events aboard the flight and in the terminal left a lasting impression, not just on those directly involved, but on the airline as a whole. Keanu Reeves' calm and thoughtful handling of the situation became a catalyst for change, inspiring the company to reassess its approach to customer service and inclusivity. A ripple effect. Shortly after the incident, the airline's management convened a meeting to address what had happened. Mark, the operations manager, recounted Keanu's words, emphasizing the importance of respect and dignity for all passengers, regardless of their appearance or background. "We need to ensure this doesn't happen again," Mark said firmly. "This is about more than avoiding bad press. It's about living up to the standards we claim to uphold." The leadership team agreed, and within weeks, the airline rolled out a new initiative, Every Passenger Matters. The program included comprehensive customer service training. All staff, from flight attendants to ground crew, attended workshops focused on empathy, inclusivity, and handling unconscious biases. Role-playing exercises encouraged employees to step into the shoes of diverse passengers, fostering greater understanding and compassion. Passenger feedback channels. A revamped feedback system allowed passengers to report concerns easily, ensuring incidents like Vanessa's behavior were addressed promptly. Accountability measures. The airline introduced stricter policies for addressing unprofessional behavior, ensuring all employees were held accountable for their actions. Vanessa was one of the first to undergo the new training, and she approached it with humility. Though the memory of her mistake stung, she used it as motivation to become better. Vanessa's reflection. For Vanessa, the experience became a profound turning point. She thought often about Keanu's words during the confrontation, "Treat every guest as if they're important, because they are." She realized that her assumptions about passengers had been shaped by biases she hadn't fully acknowledged. Her behavior toward Keanu had been a painful wake-up call, but one she was determined to learn from. Months later, Vanessa wrote a letter to Keanu. In it, she expressed her gratitude for his patience and kindness, and shared how the incident had inspired her to approach her job with a new mindset. "I've learned to see every passenger as someone with a story," she wrote. "Thank you for showing me that even mistakes can be opportunities to grow." Keanu's quiet exit. As for Keanu, he didn't dwell on the incident. After leaving the terminal that day, he slipped into the back seat of a waiting car and disappeared into the bustling city, as unassuming as he had arrived. For him, it wasn't about receiving apologies or creating headlines, it was about planting a seed of change that could grow into something meaningful. Word of Keanu's handling of the situation spread quietly among the passengers and airline staff. Those who had witnessed his grace and humility carried the story with them, sharing it as an example of how kindness could turn even uncomfortable moments into opportunities for transformation. An unforgettable legacy. Months later, as Vanessa stood at the front of the first-class cabin on a new flight, she welcomed passengers with genuine warmth and sincerity. She no longer saw them as merely ticket holders, but as individuals deserving of respect and care. Each interaction became a chance to honor the lesson she had learned. For the airline, the Every Passenger Matters program became a cornerstone of its operations, praised by customers and employees alike. Keanu Reeves' quiet grace had sparked a movement within the company, proving that even small moments could lead to significant change. And for Keanu, it was another day of living by the principles he held dear: kindness, humility, and a commitment to leaving the world just a little better than he found it.